Hello. Are you ready for some cuts? It's the Halloween autumn statement, and this time things are so bad they'll go right to the bone. Ha 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 ha. It's going to be choppy.
They've postponed it until the 17th of November.
Has he really?
Uh-huh.
Suppose he's trying to plan how deep they can go. Oh well, just have to wait a little longer.
Hello there, Tarky here. Well, in the end it was Rishi who was the anointed one. Although Penny Mordaunt did in fact run him quite closely, falling perhaps only 10 nominations short of that required to take the leadership vote out to the membership, Sunak did eventually cross the line quite comfortably. He promised us in his number 10 speech integrity, professionalism and accountability. Unfortunately, that went out the window 5 hours later when he promptly reappointed Suella Braverman to her old job as Home Secretary a week after she had been forced to resign from it because of a breach of the Ministerial Code involving releasing sensitive documents to backbench MPs who weren't officially supposed to be receiving them. This was played down at the time it actually happened, but subsequently it turns out that it is potentially rather more serious, and having been perhaps silenced initially by the fact that she was out, now there are plenty of people within the Home Office saying that they have considerable concerns about her probity as far as this is concerned. When you look at the Cabinet as well, not a great deal has changed. Braverman was required, Sunak had to do a deal with so many people, but Braverman particularly was required, and therefore no doubt promised her old job back, to bring the right wing of the party with her when she endorsed Sunak for Prime Minister. That means Sunak himself is in hock to an awful lot of the Parliamentary Conservative Party again, particularly the far right wing of it, although Sunak himself is not very strong right-winger, he is certainly heading towards that, and that obligation to other factions will no doubt drag him further right than perhaps he would naturally go. Of course, there are some things to be proud about. Sunak is the first person of colour and the first non-Christian to be made Prime Minister. In many ways, the importance of that is how matter of fact it's been taken by mostly the whole country. The usual one or two lunatics phoning into radio programmes, but mostly people have gone, yeah, okay, he's Prime Minister. Of course, having a skin colour that is not white doesn't automatically mean you're going to pursue policies that are in line with social democracy. Sunak, at the end of the day, is a Tory. His ethnicity matters not a jot there, and probably like so many others. The policies he brings with him are Thatcherite, fiscal probity, probably at the expense of individual people suffering, and the idea that the state is there to help people out in times of difficulty and to assist them in times of plenty. I don't want to get too wrapped up in the politics of it all. That is, I believe, a problem that afflicts the UK media as a whole. Too many of the Westminster journalists are almost so high on their access and the parliamentary tittle-tattle of he said, she said, they said, this committee said this, etc., etc., that it frequently fails to highlight that the actions of our parliamentarians have a dramatic impact on ordinary lives in the rest of the country. Particularly, there is the ongoing energy crisis, the cost of living crisis with inflation currently running at 10%, and some forecasts are suggesting it might approach close to 20%. Already there's talk that wage increases, despite some high-profile strikes from public sector workers attempting to redress the inequalities of the last few years, will not reach their pre-financial crash level for another 2 years now because of the situation that's going on. Added to the energy crisis and inflation is, of course, rising mortgage rates, as the Bank of England desperately tries to bring inflation to under control. Those people that were on fixed rates at low rates a year, 2 years ago, will find themselves running off. I believe the figure is something like 100,000 borrowers a month, and unable to secure anything like such good deals, thus putting up their mortgage payments by significant amounts, and for many people potentially into the realms of affordability, given how poor our housing market is. These parliamentary decisions impact people's lives. Where we're going with the forthcoming autumn statement is open to question, but there's no doubt that the Tory mentality and all the talk so far is another searing bout of austerity. It's being labelled Austerity 2, with Austerity 1 being that introduced by Cameron and Osborne when the coalition came into power in 2010. That austerity programme is widely credited by international organisations like the IMF and the World Bank with slowing Britain's recovery from the 2008 financial crash. It actually made things worse because the whole purpose, as far as the Conservative government was concerned, was to shrink the size of the state. It didn't matter what effect that actually had, the state must be shrunk. Having been through the pandemic, people have now come round to the idea that the state is actually there to offer them assistance. They are not small statists. Unfortunately, we're still saddled with a Conservative government that is very much in the realms of the small state. And indeed, with Truss and Kwarteng's government coming in 7-8 weeks ago, they brought with them far too many of the right-wing think tank personnel from Tufton Street as advisors. These people are so ideologically indoctrinating that they persuaded the Conservatives, particularly the senior Conservatives like Truss and Kwarteng, that things had got to change. Their way was the only way. The state must be shrunk. Already we've heard of Tory ministers speaking to camera saying that we've got to trim the fat. Various right-wing think tank personnel have been interviewed on news programmes, which again never identify that they are opaquely funded organisations, to say that the state is the largest it's ever been and that cannot continue to be, it must be shrunk. No one thinks to ask why it must be shrunk. That is just the ideology and the dogma. There must not be a big state. It doesn't matter that the state is trying to provide health, welfare, social care, all the things that we take far too much for granted that make our lives actually happen. We as voters have to take some blame for this, of course. We have been persuaded by various governments, New Labour as well as the Tories, that we can have all the European good things, health services, social care provisions, and all that, but with United States taxation levels. This is obviously a fantasy, and unfortunately no one's been entirely truthful with the voters. No one really likes to pay tax, but if you've got half a brain, you understand that the reason that taxes are paid is to fund things like the National Health Service, social care, etc, etc, etc. The autumn statement has been put back from Halloween, October 31st, to November the 17th, presumably to give them some thinking time and to try and sell it to various of their MPs and the cabinet ministers themselves that they've appointed to these posts. There is one significant problem, however. As many people have pointed out who aren't Tories, the state is already badly gutted out. There is no fat to trim. After Cameron and Osborne's first austerity programme, the state is so embattled that there is almost nothing left that can be cut without causing serious harm. Hopefully Sunak and his cabinet realise that many backbench MPs will not vote for this. Indeed, many of the red wallers were probably specifically elected by their constituents because of the promise of the levelling up money, which never materialised, in Johnson's 2019 government. It seems there will almost certainly have to be some tax rises, although where they will be I do not know, along with cuts somewhere. But the somewhere is a big question, and this could provide Rishi Sunak with a major challenge. As I've said, many of his Red Wall MPs were specifically elected on the basis that funds would be provided. And many of the other members of the Tory party aren't quite as psychotic as you might think. They too will understand that there is simply very little in the way of public service that can be cut without doing significant harm, long-lasting harm. We're spared the grimmest of Halloweens. We've got another 2 weeks and a couple of days before any decisions are made. I'm sure there will be leaks from the cabinet about the way they are thinking to try and prime various of their acolytes in the press to sell this to a credulous public that somehow this is the only way. Although the financial crisis engendered by Truss and Kwarteng's government has left any government with somewhat less wiggle room than they did have, be in no doubt that austerity is a political choice. There are other decisions that can be made. The Labour Party certainly wants to make those. I do have some issues with the Labour Party. I don't believe they're being dynamic enough in their offering alternatives. Some have said that that might be because they don't want the Conservatives hoovering them up and finding a way to retain popularity so that they can perhaps form even a minority government in 2 years' time. But I am alarmed by some of the things they say. Their continued following of the Tories line, and that only leads one way, where they are soft demonising immigrants and asylum seekers. We need people coming into this country. There's already a jobs crisis where there are jobs going around, but no people able to fill them. Starmer, of course, fell into the former Director of Public Prosecutions persona that he too frequently adopts at times when interviewed about the Stop Oil and Extinction Rebellion type protests that have been going on over the last few weeks. Basically, Starmer fell into that persona with he feels they should be punished more severely. I think you might perhaps argue that some of their targets are, if not wrong, then curious, since they seemed guaranteed to provoke ire rather than concern in the general public, most of whom probably are aware that there is a climate crisis going on. But nevertheless, it seems as though the Tories and the Labour Party want to run in lockstep there. As an aside, talking politics again, Rishi Sunak is apparently too busy to go to COP27 in Egypt. The King, King Charles III, is forbidden from going, even though it's an aspect that is in many ways within his sphere of interest. And Therese Coffey, the Environment Secretary, has reportedly said that all Egypt is people sitting around talking. It's quite incredible, really. It's almost as if it's an opportunity to throw it aside. The only slight plus point is that Sunak has confirmed in Prime Minister's questions, i.e. perhaps not in writing, that he intends to stick with the fracking moratorium. A small victory, but a very small one. So here we are, waiting for another couple of weeks to find out what's going to happen. What is going to be asked of the British population? What is going to be asked of British institutions to put right the country's significant financial ills, many of which have not been generated by anybody other than the Tory party, which still clings to power? We'll have to wait and see. Ooh. That's not looking good. Chin chin.
Gives me time to do my own sharpening. They'll go deep this time, and there's no fat to trim.
Don't forget to like, subscribe and share. Thank you.